So let's talk about some of the strongest units and datasheets for the Aeldari, with an overview of 10 of the strongest Craftworld units in the game right now. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Eldar, and in this video I thought it would be interesting to take a look at the Eldar units that are hitting the tabletop currently, and what's been played in successful competitive lists. The strongest things for the Aeldari have changed in really quite a big way recently, in particular with the enormous nerfs that the Inari took in the latest balance update, basically flipping them from being the optimal go-to tournament army to kind of rarely seen. The faction still seems to be solidly strong though, fairly middling win rates for around about 47% or so, quite a lot of high placings at events, with I think 5 going 5-0 undefeated runs that I've seen so far since the balance pass, plus they seem to be notably overrepresented at the WTC. Lots of the best players around deciding to take them along when they can choose only 8 40k factions, I believe potentially as a foil to Imperial Knights, where the Aeldari might be hard for them to catch but then still have the counterpunch to hit them back really hard with Fire Dragons. In any case, with Inari largely not being played so much anymore, I was interested to see what the best choices were for the Aeldari right now, and to add a bit of data to it, I took a look at 15 competitive lists that have done well in tournament since the latest balance changes, took a note of which units they took, and will go through in the order of the units that got the least to the most selections. A good chunk of units within the Codex are being played, though several aren't. There was certainly a bunch of standouts that seems to see inclusion in the vast majority of army lists doing well. Obviously things vary by detachment a fair bit as well. In general, the most popular ones that seem to be used the most and having the most success at the moment are the Aspect Host, the War Host, and the Seer Council. The Seer Council a bit lesser played compared with the previous two, and they do have some fairly obvious synergies, Aspect Host encouraging Aspect Warriors, and Seer Council encouraging the Psykers. War Host maybe being a bit more flexible, but still tends to be going down the Aspect Warrior route primarily. Kind of makes sense though, with the Fragile and Dangerous units being some of the best users of their big movement tricks. In any case though, let's talk through a fair few honourable mentions that didn't quite make the top 10, and then go through the ones that people are playing the most it seems. Starting out with just a few units that are a bit more played than some others, War Walkers seem to have made a bit of a comeback after the points decrease. They've got that interesting buff where they can buff AP by 1, that could be seriously quite nice with Dark Reapers amongst others. They've got some alright anti-tank with their Bright Lancers as well. Asmon and Dire Avengers are seeing some play. He doesn't quite one-shot entire units of Terminators by himself anymore, but still has the potential to be inflicting a lot of damage on the enemy that they'll struggle to keep up with him with his move-shoot-move. Farseers, Warlock Conclaves and Skyrunners are all popular in Seer Council. Obviously they're going to be top tier interesting units there, as they're the ones that can allow the free stratagems nearby. Warlock Skyrunners being particularly handy as cheap units that can fly around and be things to cast those spells. The Falcon Grav Tank can be an interesting one for getting small squads of Aspect Warriors into strike range, maybe 5 Fire Dragons. Guardian Defenders are nice enough to guard the home field, combining some nice enough firepower with the ability to reposition for free with Fade back, and Striking Scorpions seem to have fallen out of favour a bit versus Rangers for the infiltrate role. Some still take them though for an Aspect Warrior unit that can take the mid board and have a bit of counter-charge threat. For some other units that got higher amounts of selections but again are still outside of the top 10, next up we have the Corsair Void Reavers. They're 60 points for a unit of 5 of them, and you get squads of 5 of them with a Blaster and Euro Disruptor and Power Swords, typically taken as smaller units, and they can be nice expendable things to be able to flip mid-board objectives, as they have quite a lot of OC, and might be able to take a chunk out of the enemy while doing so potentially. They get to reroll hit rolls against things on objective markers, so that could be a small bonus there. They certainly feel like they're more used for an expendable unit role as opposed to a big damage dealer though. The Swooping Hawks were used by 7 out of the 15 army lists that I looked at. They're the fast-moving winged Aspect Warriors, 85 points for 5 of them, 170 for 10. Very fast-moving Aspect Warriors with a 14-inch move, and they're good at obliterating enemy lighter infantry with their Las Blasters, 4 shots each with lethal hits, and the Exile either taking their pattern of the Las Blaster, which gets extra strength and AP, or potentially the slightly punchier but fewer shots with the Hawk's Talon. They've got quite a lot of options. They can be cheap units to deep strike, maybe flying around and doing secondaries and hopefully eliminating the enemy's screening and scoring units while they do so, and some armies go heavy on them with multiple big squads of 10. Their shooting could maybe get fairly general purpose in the Aspect Host with things like the good damage stratagem that they have, plus maybe making use of a War Walker's extra AP boost, and plenty of the bigger squad versions might be played with Baharoth as well. His own damage output is pretty punchy when he drops into the board, and again could be pretty interesting with that stratagem getting every single hit a critical hit. He also allows the units a close deep strike, so dropping in at 6 inches, so they can use their grenade packs to throw a whole bunch of mortal wounds over the enemy, and also has the potential for a return to reserve, which is pretty fun as well. A few lists I saw used him, but not all of them. Overall definitely feels like a unit with options, even if they might struggle with hard targets without support. Next up, we've got Eldrad Ulthran, who was in 7 out of the 15 army list. He's 110 points for one of the Eldari's greatest psychers, a 5-wound character with a 4+ invulnerable save. He has some psychic damage with Mind War with precision, but is mainly there for his 2 special rules. He can farm command points, generating 1 command point at the start of the command phase if he's on the battlefield, and then he can also amp up shooting as well with Doom. If he can see a target, then he can mark it, and then the rest of the friendly Eldari models all get +1 to wound against that unit, which is a pretty enormous damage buff if you're focusing fire on one thing. Exactly the sort of thing that you quite like to have against things like Knights. For a retinue, both Storm Guardians or Guardian Defenders could be interesting enough. Storm Guardians having good value from their sticky objectives, and the Defenders maybe helping keep safe with their fade away. Though it seems that in a fair few high-level tournament lists he's just run completely solo, I guess hoping not to run into indirect fire too much. Then for our final one outside of the top 10, there's the Storm Guardians, 100 points for 10 Aeldari and their Serpent scale platform. They've got OC2, so a fair bit of weight on objectives, some special weapons and power swords in the units, but generally kind of low threat. The biggest draw to have a unit of them in the list is their sticky objectives. Really quite nice to have that on the home field objective, as it just gives you a fair few options. It might mean that units holding the home field could counterattack things that try and deep strike and take things off you, as opposed to having to wait on the point. Or if the opponent's not threatening your home field towards the end of the game, any units in the home field could potentially move up to the mid-board and try and fight over objectives for a last few points potentially. As mentioned, they could also be handy enough for guarding Eldrad or maybe another Psyker. More than one unit in a more optimised list probably doesn't make sense though, given that there's just so much diminishing returns after one copy of your sticky objectives rule. Before we move onwards and up the list, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Tabletop Stronghold. They're makers of magnetic carry cases suitable for Warhammer miniatures. Like other magnetic storage out there, the idea being that you put magnets on the bottoms of the bases so they hold in spot on the magnetic sheets, and you can fit loads of miniatures in one tight space without the need for foam or anything. There's plenty of different takes on magnetic carry cases out there, and you can DIY your own, but for those looking for something purpose-built for it, Tabletop Stronghold's version of these are their mag cases. Basically a really durable box made of sturdy MDF, very hard to damage and break, and within that box there's multiple layers worth of steel shelves. They can slot in at different levels and be raised or lowered depending on the height of the miniatures that you're trying to transport. Then on the front of the box there's a clear acrylic sheet, so you can see the miniatures while they're in storage and transport, which is nice enough for showing off any cool paint jobs. Broadly speaking, reviews and feedback that I've seen on Reddit and the YouTube comments tend to be really positive about these. Maybe a little bit heavier than some is one of the few criticisms. Generally it seems that most people quite enjoy theirs. In any case, check them out, links down in the video description. If you do happen to pick anything up, they gave me an AT25 code for 25% off when they're between sales, and I'll cycle back to them briefly at the end of the video to talk through a few of their options for their cases. Back to the Eldar though, and for the most commonly played units, it's kind of interesting for the subset of lists that I talked about. There's no less than 10 units that were taken in 2/3 of the army lists or more. Quite a lot of conversions on what's good, though admittedly a fair few of these are Phoenix Lords leading their aspects. First up of these, taken in 10 of the 15 army lists, was the Autarch, the standard battlefield commander for the Craftworlds. They give their unit a decreased cost of stratagems, which is really quite handy given the amount of powerful ones available in the War Host and the Aspect Host, and they can also make the slightly random Eldari movement a little bit more reliable as well, re-rolling advanced rolls and re-rolling the random number agile maneuvers. Could be handy enough for things trying to fade away to safety or get scary fusion guns up close. For war gear, people generally tend to take the Starglaive, 4 attacks at strength 6, AP 3 and damage 3, and then either paired with a Reaper launcher or a Dragon fusion gun, easily the most threatening ranged weapons. It's certainly interesting enough in both Aspect Host or War Host, maybe particularly in Aspect Host, where there's maybe some more incentive to big scary damage dealer units of Aspect Warriors. It seems that he's got plenty of solid options to lead. Howling Banshees are quite a nice one, as he can add some big hitting strength 6 and damage 3 melee into the mix. Quite nice to have some extra punch there, plus the stratagems on a unit that's likely got the abilities to be able to hit the enemy first. Otherwise can be really good on big units of Fire Dragons or Dark Reapers, maybe a big squad of 10 of them, and then use his 3 stratagems either on damage dealers or fading in and out of a Wave Serpent. With stratagems able to do that both in the War Host and Aspect Host, he can take War Gear to match his squad as well if he wants to, the Fusion Gun in the Fire Dragons and the Reaper Launcher for Dark Reapers. For enhancements, I've seen people using the Shimmerstone in the Aspect Host for the -1 to wound to make his unit that bit tougher, and could be a useful enough generic character to bear Timeless Strategist in War Host. That's the one that gives you extra battle focus. Next up, and also with 10 selections, we've got our first Phoenix Lord in Lhykhis. The new Phoenix of the Whispering Web quite clearly had some fairly crazy rules when the Codex came out. She leads Warp Spiders, so can flicker jump a big 24 inches with them, contribute to their shooting in quite a big way with the boosted Death Spinners, and then has the fairly crazy ability to be able to charge in a turn in which warp spiders have flicker jumped, so basically 24-inch move and then charge after that, which has got a fair amount of general purpose damage with lethal hits, and is often accompanied by a warp spider squad with the Exarch bearing the power blade array. Probably still not going to be the biggest threat in the world to vehicles, but should be a really big danger to medium and elite infantry. There's not really that many units in 40k that can hit quite this hard after jumping directly into the heart of the enemy army from a really long way away behind cover. On top of that, she can also set up some potentially interesting combos as well. Her ranged attack can hand out critical hits 5+ against one target, which could help out her units in melee, or potentially set up other combos like the Aspect Host one, where you pay a command point for sustained lethal and ignores cover if you sacrifice an Aspect token. With all that going on, you could make just about any of the shooty aspects monstrously more dangerous, whether it's Dark Reapers, Swooping Hawks, or Fire Dragons. Overall, a very scary model for 120 points. Speaking of Dark Reapers, they're 90 points per 5 of them, or 195 for 10. They're very slightly more heavily armoured Aeldari Aspect Warriors with a 3+ save, and their main damage being the Reaper launchers with Strength 10 and Damage 3 shooting, or they can swap it out for some stuff that's good against lighter infantry. They get both ignores cover and ignores modifiers to their shooting, so quite reliably dealing their damage there. The Exarch can then either take a Tempest launcher for a fair bit of indirect fire with damage 1, or could just double down on the squad's main purpose, perhaps taking an Aeldari missile launcher. Overall, they're a pretty interesting unit that can punch hard against heavy infantry and lighter vehicles at a long distance, and could make some pretty good use of any stratagems that are sent their way, maybe Warwalker debuffs against their targets, or maybe having a big unit jumping in and out of a wave serpent to keep them safe while they keep up a big barrage of long-range fire. The Autarch could help them out there potentially. There could also be good ones to use Fire and Fade in a Warhost as well. Competitive lists seem to have a good balance between smaller units of 5, which are cheaper at 90 points, and include more Exarchs, or big units of 10 that are more efficient for stratagems and things. I feel like there's maybe a few more ones with the Tempest launchers for that bit of indirect fire, perhaps particularly for armies taking multiple small units of 5 of them, though some just choose to go with the direct damage. Next up, we've got the Burning Lance himself in Fuegan, really quite nicely resculpted with his 10th edition miniature, and bearing his enormous Firepark Searsong. His personal damage threat is fairly scary enough in itself, Searsong being an enormous Melter 6 weapon that has a 24-inch range if he's leading his Fire Dragons, as his buff gives them a +6-inch range, pretty excellent for getting the strike on their target from a bit further away. He can potentially help in a big way with his squad's firepower there, or otherwise potentially make them a little bit more general purpose if he goes with the beam mode of it, with a bunch of Space Marine killing attacks that this squad might struggle with for volume otherwise. Beyond that, he's also got a Resurrection on 2+ if he's destroyed special rule, so that means that even if the Fire Dragons do go in for one last big kill and then get wiped out in return, he's probably going to stand back up and be ready to have one last go. As well as his Fire Pike, he also has his Fire Axe as well, so can cleave apart a few foes in melee if it makes sense to when doing that. It seems to be most popular to field him in a great big squad of 10 Fire Dragons, potentially a unit that could be wiping out multiple enemy units all at once with their boosted ranged fusion guns, and well worth it to use any stratagems or battle focus tokens on, maybe jumping in and out of a wave serpent, getting more movement towards their foe, and not needing quite so much range to get into melter range compared with other units. Big hitting anti-tank weapons with that kind of damage profile don't seem the worst thing to have in the army while knights are around as well. Sticking with the Phoenix Lords though, and the next most popular is Jain Zar. We're getting into what looks like fairly seriously auto-include territory at this point, with 12 out of the 15 successful army lists that are looked at running her. She's the first choice leader character it seems for Howling Banshees currently, not the single most expensive character in the world at 105 points compared with the other Phoenix Lords, and making the Howling Banshees just very reliable at charging a very long way, advancing 6 inches on top of their already good 8 inches, and then still being able to charge. They could be going even further with Battle Focus or Warhost buffs, and then her weapon is the Blade of Destruction, 8 attacks at Strength 6, AP 3 and Damage 2, so a bit more general purpose compared with her sisters, though she still does get the Anti-Infantry 3+ as well. She also has the advantage of re-rolling wound rolls against character units, so it's just going to be extra dangerous against them, and could just bring that little bit of extra threat against big tough characters like monsters and vehicle ones, if that was the only thing that the squad's going to be able to fight this turn. Unlike Fuegan though, it doesn't look like as many people attempted to bulk out the squad, still just running her with 5 Howling Banshees to deliver her maybe, more so than making use of buffs for the squad I guess. Next up, and also in the vast majority of army lists, we have the Wave Serpent. 125 points gets at least a fairly sturdy transport, 13 wounds at toughness 9 with a 5+ invulnerable save, and a big -1 to wound against ranged attacks if the strength is greater than its model's toughness, which it often will be for things that are actually going to threaten it properly. Otherwise, the Wave Serpent is perhaps most often armed with a pair of Bright Lances plus a Shuriken Cannon. Wave Serpents just seem to be a pretty excellent staging post for basically most of the Aspect Warriors, both in the Aspect host and in the War host, maybe most often used with great big 10-man squads, where using stratagems you can potentially move the transport into somewhere safe, perhaps just tucked behind some ruins, jump out the squads to shoot the enemy, and then use a 1 command point to fade back into the transport later on, potentially giving your opponent a really problematic unit that can shoot them but not get shot back. And then even when they catch up with the transport itself, it's not exactly a pushover to take down, and it's going to take some focus damage even before you break it and allow the dangerous aspects to come flooding out to attack you all over again. There's definitely other options with how to use it though, and you could do things like cycle units out of it, send the first unit off with the boosted threat range that jumping out the front could get, and then jump other units into it to do the same in later turns. Seems when they're included it's mainly just one Wave Serpent, perhaps two. Next up, we've got the flicker jumping teleporters that are the warp spiders themselves. They were again in 13 out of the 15 army lists, always fielded in small squads of 5 for 95 points. The Aspect Warriors that can just emerge from the warp to shred you with death spinners, and there's very little that you can do to get in their way when they're flicker jumping across. They've got a reasonable enough 12-inch move anyway, though if they flicker jump then they go 24 inches. They can't charge that turn, and there's a good chance that one takes a mortal wound, but for a unit that's overall not ridiculously expensive, it's pretty crazy to allow them basically 1-inch deep strike pretty much if they can get themselves to a good jumping off point that's safe somewhere behind a ruin in the midboard. The Death Spinners have some fairly nasty torrent attacks, and the Exarch contributes more, usually with a Spinneret rifle and Death Weavers. Between all that, they should do a good job of shredding enemy objective grabbers, and if it's getting later in the game, they could think about just using their abilities just to get secondary objectives and score more points, if that's going to be the most critical thing. They do tend to be a very popular unit, lots of lists running maybe 2 or 3 squads of them, and as we've seen, Lhykhis is already in the vast majority of lists as well, most likely leading one squad here equipped with power blades instead to make the most of her big melee move. Finally, we get into the top 3 though, 3 units that were taken in all but one of the army lists, and first up we have the cheap infiltrating rangers. The Outcasts are just 55 points for an infiltrate unit that can start in the midboard, and that's almost always going to have some pretty serious value in the vast majority of 40k armies. Infiltrators just being such a big thing, being able to screen back enemy infiltrators and scouts, and then being in the midboard to either contest primaries straight away or do first turn secondary objectives. It's quite nice for the Aeldari to have cheap units that aren't going to be a huge deal if they're lost as well, so a 55 point squad is pretty nice even if they're not going to be all that hard to take down with their 1 wound and their low save. They do get invulnerable and stealth against ranged things, so it might take a tiny bit more firepower to take down there though. Otherwise, they've got a little bit of sniper fire that occasionally might do something, and their special rule is quite a helpful one for a midboard skirmishing one, but having a d6 inches reactive move, potentially meaning that the opponent might advance a squad to try and destroy them, and then they can hide behind a ruin or back directly away from melee, and maybe have the squad survive to be a nuisance for one more turn. Overall, pretty excellent value to at least have some presence in the midboard. Lists generally seem to go for either 1 or 2 units of 5, maybe weighing them up versus striking scorpions for the infiltrate role. It does seem that the vast majority of people are going for the cheaper option rather than upgrading to the scorpions, at least at the moment in successful lists though. Next up, and also on 14 selections, we have the Howling Banshees. These Daughters of Khaine are pretty murderous anti-infantry melee, attacking with a whole flurry of power swords, hitting on a 2+ with anti-infantry 3+, the Exarch taking Executioner for a few attacks at strength 6, AP 3 and damage 3. They're very fast, being able to move 8 inches and then advance and charge natively. With battle focus added to that, they should be able to reach a whole bunch of the midboard when jumping out of a ruin, and might be able to get other movement buffs as well, Jain Zar giving them the auto 6 advance or jumping out of Wave Serpents. As well as Jain Zar, they could often also be led by an Autarch, allowing them access to free stratagems, plus having a few more strength 6 and damage 3 attacks in the unit, help keep them a little bit more general purpose, and more of a threat to heavy infantry like Terminators. And it seems very common to have around about 2 squads of 5 in a competitive list, the right sort of investment on jumping on the enemy units and murdering them it seems. It could also be a particularly useful one for using the Deny Overwatch stratagem on, as that's going to be one of the main things that gets in their way, and they have added value against melee armies if for some reason the enemy is not going to be able to take them down in shooting in return. They get fights first, which could be a problem for enemies trying to charge them, and also even a 4+ invulnerable save in melee as well, so there might be some chance that the Exarch or attached characters might survive. Overall, between all that though, currently they're a solid and scary aspect of Khaine. Finally, and perhaps unsurprisingly in the crowding spot with the rest, are the Fire Dragons, again taken in all but one list that chose to pass them up for some reason. 120 points for a unit of 5 or 220 for a unit of 10, so a little cheaper per model for the bigger squad. The fire dragons just have the one job and do it very well in obliterating enemy tanks. They have their dragon breath fusion guns with melter 3 and they're able to advance and shoot them, otherwise being a standard melter gun profile, but then assured destruction allows you to re-roll the hits, wounds and damage rolls with their ranged attacks, so even the slightly lower strength there doesn't really phase them too much against tough stuff. They're going to be hitting the vast majority of their shots and wounding with most of them. If they can get into melter range, every single damage is going to be felt in a really big way. Then to supplement that, the Autarch generally either tends to take the fire pike or their own boosted fusion gun, the fire pike having the strength 12 and the boosted range, and the Autarch fusion gun getting the big melter 6 rule, so potentially could be an interesting one to expend the Auspex shrine token on to make sure that it wounds. Even after having had a couple of points increases, there's still some of the premier anti-tanks in the game. Both 5s and 10s of them can work really well, 10s of them potentially joined by Fuegan or an Autarch. Fuegan for the boosted range, and the Autarch for some free stratagems, jumping in and out of wave serpents, or activating shooting damage buffs. They'll enjoy the range damage buffs that you can get from both Aspect Host and War Host potentially. Overall, most lists seem to take around about 10 to 20 fire dragons, though potentially broken up in different ways between squads of 5 and 10. Certainly not a bad unit to have around in a pinch, and seem quite popular at the WTC, maybe being able to obliterate some enemy knights when they need to. In any case, that's just about it for 10 of the scariest Aeldari units right now. Let me know your thoughts as to the units down in the comments below, and I look forward to any other insights or thoughts on them that I might have skimmed over. I'm sure I'm missing all manner of crafty tricks with the sheer amount of movement options and combos they have in different detachments. That's the end of this one, but before I go, I'll just cycle back to the video sponsor and Tabletop Stronghold if you did want to hear a bit more about their magnetic carry cases, which will be links down in the video description. Each of these mag cases holds these steel transport trays. These are roughly how many miniatures that you can fit on each one, around about 90-25mm bases when fully loaded, or 6 armigers for example. And then they've got basically different cases of different heights. The mini one is around £72 or $75, that's using the discount code, so even this one's got at least a fair bit of space in it, enough room for some big chunky tanks and a whole bunch of Terminators. The price generally includes shipping to the destinations listed, but might be exclusive of things like VAT or import duties. The mainland mag case is a bigger one. You can see there's a fair bit more room on it by the Chaos Knight hanging out on the bottom floor there, really quite a tall one with a fair bit of room. I'll leave the internal dimensions on the screen here, and they all come with some magnets to mount to the model's bases as well. Finally, there's the really big one in the mag case XL, which is basically 2 of the previous attached together. There's an entire Baneblade on the top left of this one, and this one's modelling the acrylic sheet that you have on the front of it too. Check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to take a look over their range. Certainly use that AT25 if you're buying anything for the 25% off, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. I'll leave this one there for now though. Look forward to hearing your thoughts on the Aeldari units, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Check out the channel's Patreon page, linked down in the video description if you'd like to support. There's a few benefits there, including seeing certain videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways. But otherwise, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.